over these last couple of months. And it's highlighted the urgency of digital inclusion. I think somebody a bit earlier on, just before we started, talked about how the world is now an even smaller village after the pandemic. And we are increasingly relying on digital technologies to stay connected with friends, family, work, to purchase necessities, to access healthcare, education, and even to meet. What would have been a physical conference, bringing people from all over the world, can now happen from the comfort of your living room or your office. And this accelerated digitization, however, is accompanied by widening digital divides that lock billions of people out of this digital economy. And further to that, trust in technology is fraying as citizens and governments wake up to the risks and the harms of its unexamined and unrestrained applications. Now, back in December last year, the WBA's first digital inclusion benchmark assessed and ranked 100 of the most influential tech companies in the world on their performance on digital inclusion. 4 of Africa's leading digital companies, I'm talking about Safaricom, Jumia, MTN, and Naspers, were part of the assessment. At the same time, these companies, as well as other assessed companies, have a spread operating in more than 30 countries across the African continent. I'm sure you're curious to know what the results showed us. They showed us that commitment and contribution towards digital inclusion is highly uneven across industries in the digital sector, measurement areas, and markets of operation. Now, while a few leading companies, including those with operations in Africa, comprehensively demonstrate best practices, most of them, to be quite honest, have yet to embrace digital inclusion as a core responsibility. And that is something that should trouble us all. We believe that more can be done to leverage the benchmark's data and to effectively equip all of you who've joined us for this roundtable, stakeholders in this sector, to influence the private sector's efforts towards digital inclusion, which supports the achievement of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, just to give you the bigger picture. So that is why we are gathered here today. And I also want to let you know that this event is co-hosted by the World Benchmarking Alliance, the collaboration of International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, CIPESA, together with the International Telecommunication Union, Africa Regional Office, ITU. Now, I mentioned earlier, we are recording this event, so please be aware of that. I also want to add that I'd like to ask all of you to mute yourselves unless you want to make an intervention. You can raise your hand using the Zoom function. You'll be given a chance to make your contribution. You can also use the chat function, and I'd encourage as many of us who are able to do that to do so. Ask questions, share comments, set the expectations that you have for this roundtable today, and we'll be able to engage around some of those discussions. Also, because we know many of you might also be checking on your phones occasionally, please get on social media, and we encourage you to share your thoughts on digital inclusion in Africa on social media, the hashtag that you want to use, and I've got 2 of them that I'm going to give to you, DIB 2020, that's Digital Inclusion Benchmark 2020, and also Digital Inclusion Benchmark. You can tag SDG Benchmarks at CIPESA UG and at ITU Africa, and we will be scrolling some of that in the chat section. If you just want to pick that up and post on your social media accounts, please let the world know what is happening here today. Now, at this time, I want to take us straight to the next part of the program, what you've been eagerly awaiting for, the official start. And at this juncture, allow me to introduce Lourdes Montenegro, who's the lead digital sector transformation at the World Benchmarking Alliance, to make our opening remarks. Lourdes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wahiga. Good afternoon, everyone. As Wahiga said, I'm Lourdes Montenegro. I lead the digital sector work of the WBA, which stands for World Benchmarking Alliance. Welcome to our Africa Roundtable on Digital Inclusion, which we are pleased to co-host with CIPESA. We hope that through our dialogue today, we are able to share with each other insights on progress towards digital inclusion in Africa and our own roles and contributions, whether we represent civil society, digital technology companies, investors, think tanks, academics, or governments and US and UN agencies. I am super excited to see representatives from many different countries in Africa, as well as our allies and global stakeholders. And I am very hopeful that through this dialogue, we can come together to spark a global coalition which will take coordinated actions to drive positive change in the digital sector. For many here who are unfamiliar with the WBA, allow me a brief overview. The WBA is a global initiative organized as a nonprofit and working together with now over 230 allies worldwide to encourage a race to the top on corporate actions towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Together with our allies, including investors with over 9 trillion assets under management, we see the need to transform whole systems as a necessary condition for achieving the SDGs. So the digital system is one of those 7 systems which we are working to transform. And we believe that this positive transformation is aided by free and publicly available ranking and metrics on the performance of the world's most influential digital technology companies. While digital technologies, we all know, can be applied towards the achievement of all, if not most, SDGs, it will require still the transformation of the current system for innovating, producing, and distributing digital goods and services towards one that is genuinely inclusive and trustworthy. At present, there continue to be glaring disparities in access, in skills, in safety and security, and most especially in opportunities to participate in and benefit from digital innovation. And we see these disparities between high and low income countries, but it's also problematic within each country, regardless of its level of economic development. So access is a basic, but it's not the only requisite for digital inclusion. People also need relevant skills, whether these are basic skills, broader media literacy and online safety skills, or technical skills. Safety and security, of course, is also another requisite. People from all walks of life need to be able to trust that their fundamental human rights are not abused, including the right to privacy and security of their data or metadata. And finally, digital innovation will need to be open, inclusive, and ethical to provide fair chances for everyone, all of us here, to help shape the creation of a human-centered digital future. Unfortunately, what we are seeing from the data is that the digital economy is highly concentrated in 2 countries, the US and China, which together account for 90% of the market capitalization for the largest digital platforms. 70% of all blockchain technology patents, 50% of all global spending on the Internet of Things, and 75% of the world market for public cloud computing. Later in this session, my colleagues will share with you some of the Africa-relevant insights we have gathered through the 2020 Global Corporate Digital Inclusion Benchmark, which, as mentioned earlier, we have published in December. And we invite all of you, of course, to explore that, but we also invite all of you to explore how we can work together using such data to power our actions and advocacies. Again, welcome and looking forward to our fruitful dialogue.
Thank you so much. If we were meeting in person, that's where I would have said down applause, but let's do a virtual one instead. That's how the International Sector Commission, the World Benchmarking Alliance, which was giving on WBA, the role that investors and civil society as well, to ensure action to fill in the gaps on digital inclusion is done, and to push for the implementation as well of policies that support digital transformation. And we'll be getting deeper into that even as we continue. But at this time, I would now like to welcome, and it's a proud honor to welcome our keynote speaker today, Mr. Andrew Lugege, who is the Regional Director for Africa ITU. Mr. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure. The pleasure is actually mine because this roundtable gets to a subject that should be close to every African's heart, every person that is concerned with Africa. So it is my pleasure to sit with you to address the elephant in the room. Over the past 18 months, it's been increasingly evident that broadband and ICTs play a critical role in our daily lives for overall growth of the national economies. COVID-19 has laid bare the realities that underpin our global economies, the interconnectedness, with a key lesson that not being connected to the internet poses a risk of missing out on several opportunities: employment, education, health, public service, as well as the power of information and digital transformation, which in turn limits us, the citizens, from fully participating economically and socially in the modern digital world. According to the newly launched ITU Measuring Digital Development Facts and Figures 2020 report, 3.7 billion people in the world are not connected to the internet and were therefore not able to take advantage of the transformative power of the information and communication technologies, not least during this period of the pandemic. Many of the live in the least developed countries, and despairingly, most of these are in the rural areas and remote communities and cross-gender. And guess where most of those are? The majority of those here in our continent. To put things in context, ITU figures 2020 show that at the onset of the lockdown, only 28% of households in urban areas in Africa had access to the internet. This number is worse in rural areas where only 6.3% of households had internet. Only 20% of women are using the internet compared to 37% of men, exposing the persistence and prevailing gender and digital gap in sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to take careful note that digital inclusion, the bigger part of that is the gender disparity in digital connectivity. In the roadmap on digital cooperation, the UN Secretary General identifies a global multi-stakeholder effort as a key element in achieving digital inclusion. And I quote, "While governments remain at the center, the involvement of the private sector," he said, "technology companies, civil society, and other stakeholders is essential. It is vital to engage with the private sector, the technical community, and civil society from the beginning if realistic and effective decisions and policies are to be made." End of quote. ITU, as the specialized agency of the UN, is committed to connecting everyone in the world, wherever they live, whatever their means, and make the transformation equitable, safe, inclusive, and affordable for all. Lourdes just said it's not about access only. It's about many other things, including affordability. So with full respect of human rights, we strive to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and deliver on our promise to leave no one behind and certainly no one offline. We are therefore honored to be part of this roundtable, as I said earlier, in partnership with the World Benchmarking Alliance, WBA, and the collaboration on the International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, CIPESA, whose aim is to help foster coordinated multi-stakeholder actions that encourage a race to the top on digital inclusion and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, as stressed earlier. To this end, ITU is committed to strengthen multi-stakeholder cooperation, coordinate the sharing of experiences among member states in terms of funds and technologies, and improve accessibility of networks in developing countries through multi-stakeholder collaboration. ITU is one of the few UN agencies that draws membership from governments and over 900 members from the private sector, academia, and research institutions, international and regional organizations, among others. We provide a neutral platform for knowledge sharing and expertise to facilitate ICT-centric innovation. Ours is a unique ecosystem connecting governments, industry, academia, regional and international organizations, and UN agencies, a truly multi-stakeholder community working for an inclusive, smart society. So you too can and should join us. Ladies and gentlemen, as was said earlier, it's not just about connectivity and SDG agenda of 2030. Putting universal connectivity at the very forefront of sustainable development efforts and recognizing its central role in this SDG agenda. ITU Main Development Conference, WTDC 21, is appropriately named Connecting the Unconnected to Achieve Sustainable Development. It is scheduled for the very first time to be held in Africa, here in Ethiopia. The WTDC 2021 is a unique opportunity to develop innovative approaches and new models of collaboration for connectivity and digital solutions in the final decade of action to achieve SDGs. Unfortunately, time is too short, so a few key words. We've been developing interactive transmission maps that shows you where the gaps are, not that. We have started an initiative called Connect to Recover that after this devastating COVID-19 is helping member states to get back on their feet and to revive their networks and build new ones. We have published a new Connecting Humanity report. Check that out as well, as it looks at investment needs and opportunities. I would like to leave you with the words of respect. When we build networks, when you are building networks for inclusivity, do not forget that children also access these networks. Do not forget that young girls are on these networks, so we need to be cognizant of their needs and their protection and the need for capacity development. When I say their protection, we have an initiative that is on running for child online protection, and we've developed guidelines for this. They have been put on the internet and they can be checked out. There's a lot more to say, but I know I have limited time and I don't want to mess up this, but let me leave a call to action. I call on everyone, governments, private sector, academia, research, development, communities, and others to please continue to facilitate cooperation and partnership in areas such as innovation, infrastructure, investment, and capacity development to achieve digital transformation that leaves no one behind, no one unconnected. I want to call on you to continue leveraging telecommunications and ICT by developing digital policies and strategies to adopt and respond in a timely manner and effectively to different challenges that occur. I want to call on you to share with ITU your challenges, lessons learned, expertise, guidelines, success stories, case studies, good practices, solutions, and publications, and policies put in place to better meet this challenge of digital inclusion. Truly appreciate this opportunity offered by WPA to share knowledge and information on contribution of the private and digital inclusion in Africa. And I wish you fruitful deliberations. I apologize if I run over by a couple of minutes.
You have no reason to apologize. Mr. Andrew Rugege, who is the Regional Director for Africa, ITU, with a keynote speech that has lent great gravitas to this roundtable that we have today, really building up from where Lourdes Montenegro got us started, painting a picture of the disparities in digital access, gender disparity as well, skills, affordability, basically universal connectivity, but also leaving us with a call to action very early on for us to think about, and also paving the way for the next part, because I know many of you want to know more about this 2020 digital inclusion benchmark. What were the findings? What do they mean for you, whichever part of the African continent or the world you are from? That's where I want to take you to at this time. So Mr. Rugege, once again, thank you very much. Let me now introduce World Benchmarking Alliance's Michael Minges, who's the research lead at WBA, and Samantha Diwalana, who's a research analyst at the same organization, to share insights on the 2020 digital inclusion benchmark findings for the companies with a presence in Africa. Prepare yourselves to just listen in as they share those findings.
Thank you, Wahiga. Let me just share my screen. Greetings, everyone. As Wahiga said, myself and my colleague, Michael Minges, are going to share some insights from the first iteration of the benchmark. So the digital inclusion benchmark, as Lourdes mentioned, is based on 4 interconnected measurement areas that can be seen as key for achieving digital inclusion. So we start with access. First off, people need to have access to digital technologies. We then have skills. Once people have access, they need the skills in order to be able to use technology, first in a general way, and then in a way that furthers their livelihoods. Next is use, and this touches on safety. So once people can access technology and have the skills to use it, they need to trust that technology, and they need to know that companies are implementing different policies to keep them safe online. And lastly is innovation. And once people can access, they have the skills, they feel safe using technology, that helps drive innovation, which creates new, exciting digital technologies. But what's key here is that companies need to innovate in an inclusive way and an ethical way. As Lourdes mentioned, the benchmark launched in December 2020. The results for the first iteration are out and you can access them online. We also encourage you to have a look at our synthesis report. In the first iteration of the benchmark, we covered 100 digital companies headquartered across the world. We had 4 of them which were headquartered in Africa, as you can see, the 4 on the left. But the spread went beyond just these 4 companies. 40 of the 100 companies had office locations in Africa. And this went across 42 countries from the Sahel region all the way down to South Africa, where that green dot indicates that 34 companies had operations in South Africa. So this could be a normal office, an R&D space, or even manufacturing. Going back to the 4 companies, Jumia had 6 offices and MTN had 17. So this is just an indication of the spread of the companies in this region, but my colleague Michael will go into greater detail about the influence and impact of these companies. I will now share some insights about the digital skills part of the benchmark. As Lourdes mentioned, access and digital skills are key to driving digital inclusion. A report from GSMA looking at sub-Saharan Africa noted that while that 49% of people are covered, but they do not use the internet. Some reasons for this include affordability and digital skills. This again highlights the importance of digital skills in driving sustainable digital inclusion. Within the benchmark, we looked at digital skills on 3 levels. And the first of these is basic. So basic digital skills are helping people know how to use the internet or how to use a laptop or a smartphone. Intermediate digital skills look at those skills where people can use digital technologies to further their livelihoods, whether it's by starting a job or entrepreneurship. And technical digital skills look at more advanced skills such as coding. In addition, we also looked at the efforts companies are taking to support school connectivity. So this is companies supporting connection to infrastructure such as the internet or hardware for companies. Across the benchmark, we saw that 15 companies have digital skills or connectivity programs in sub-Saharan Africa. This shows that while some companies are stepping in and getting involved with digital skills in the continent, there is still opportunities, there's still room for the remaining 85 companies to grow in this area and to do more. Of these 15 companies, their programs were spread across 45 countries within Africa. However, we did sometimes notice a concentration in certain regions or certain countries, such as Kenya and South Africa. And I will touch on this a bit more later on in the slides. An example of a basic digital skills program is the mobile internet training, the skills training toolkit by GSMA. It's been implemented in conjunction with a few digital companies, including Airtel and MTN. This program, what happens with this program is that users are taught how to value the internet and how to use platforms such as Wikipedia or Facebook or Google. They're also given some insight into online safety and the costs of the internet. Going beyond this, Airtel and MTN have trained over 10,000 sales agents using the toolkit. And the idea is that these sales agents will then go on to train others in basic digital skills. What was quite interesting, a result of this program, is that once people get the hang of using smartphones to access the internet, they then want to take the next step. They want to go beyond social media and they want to learn how to use it to further their lives, such as by accessing government services online. And so this shows the importance of basic digital skills as a stepping stone to more digital inclusion. An example for intermediate digital skills is the Africa Academy by Airbnb. Launched in South Africa, this program teaches people how to use information and tools to launch their properties or activities online on Airbnb. And in this way, it's helping to create entrepreneurship around tourism, which is more inclusive and moves away from maybe the more common or more popular tourist sites to having tourism within local economies that benefit people on the ground. And in this way, this program is then helping people learn skills, which then improves their livelihoods, taking it a step further. Technical digital skills, as I mentioned before, include more advanced skills, more advanced programs. And here, Cisco's Networking Academy is an example of this. So in Networking Academy, Cisco teaches users who are 13, some who are older, advanced digital skills such as programming and networking. In Africa, they've reached over 800,000 students. It's really important to note that programs like this, the Cisco Networking Academy, is run free of charge. There's no tuition cost to the students. And in 2019, Cisco announced that by 2025, they're looking to expand this program to 1 million Africans. With regards to school connectivity, Companies often have flagship programs which run across the continent. You can see a few of the programs in the table on the left. These programs look at connecting schools, such as the Vodafone Instant Network Schools, which connect schools within refugee camps in 6 African countries. Looking at the image on the right, we start to see the concentration of programs, which I briefly touched on earlier. So we see that while these programs do go over a wide range of Africa, Kenya has 4 programs, Senegal has 4, and South Africa has 3. And there are still some countries which are untouched. This shows that there's an opportunity for different companies to step into that role and to help promote school connectivity and other digital skills. Here is an example of a school connectivity project, the Giga project. Here, once one school is connected to the internet, this then goes on to benefit over 300 students, which then goes on to benefit the greater community around that school, with over, or close to rather, 600 people having access to the internet, and therefore access to digital technology and access they become more digitally included. We then see that once this was expanded to over 6,000 schools, and this was in Zimbabwe, the program was then able to reach 20% of Zimbabwe's population. This shows the scope for the positive influence of school connectivity. It goes beyond just the school and can have wider influence and wider impact on the entire community. COVID-19, as Andrew already touched on, has had a huge impact across the world, and Africa is no exception there. During lockdown, schools were closed, some universities closed, and people weren't able to access their education. Education now had to move online. And there are many positives to this, but also many costs. And one of those costs, or one of those difficulties, is connectivity, is people having the skills to access their education online. We saw companies stepping in to fill this void through investing in online platforms or free educational material. And we see here that 5 of these technology companies have been recognized for their efforts. So as mentioned, COVID-19 has had a big impact on digital inclusion and digital skills across the continent. There is scope for companies to step in. We saw that not the entire continent hasn't been reached yet in terms of programs, in terms of school connectivity. So these are opportunities for companies to step up and to step into these roles and support local people and support governments in digital skills. Because we know that digital skills are part of the wider digital inclusion and part of the steps that we need to take to achieve digital inclusion. School connectivity is important here. As we saw in the example of the Giga project, school connectivity can have wider implications for the wider society. And so again, this emphasizes the importance of digital skills as a stepping stone to digital inclusion. I now hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Samantha. As Lourdes mentioned, I'm Michael Mingus, the research lead for the benchmark. And I'd like to draw on this location data set that we developed as part of the benchmark and expand a bit more now on what companies are doing operationally. Next slide, please. So here's a graphic from one of the companies that claimed it was a worldwide company that reflects the whole wide world, but showing how many offices it has in different regions. And we'll all notice right away that this couldn't be a worldwide company because it's completely omitting one major region of the world. So the good news is that not all companies of the Keystone companies are like that. Next slide, please. So if you look at the left chart, it shows where companies, the top 100 companies, have a significant presence. So by significant presence, we mean there's a headquarters, there's a telecom network, there's warehouses for e-commerce, there's data centers, R&D, major investments. So that reduces the original list of just companies with an office from 41 to 14. And again, you see by the size of the dots that certain countries in Africa have emerged as sort of hubs, attracting a lot of interest: South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria. Now, every country needs a telecommunications network, right? So let's take away the telecom networks and you end up with the right chart, which is very sobering. There's hardly anything there beyond telecommunication networks. And the World Bank refers to what they call the first mile, the middle mile, and the last mile. The last mile is all about access. And a lot of the emphasis in Africa has been on access, connecting the unconnected. And the first mile is about international bandwidth. There too, there's been a lot of assistance. Now every sea-facing country in Africa has submarine cable except for Eritrea. So I'm not saying those first and last mile issues have been completely solved yet, but they've gone a long way to the exclusion of the middle mile. And this is a real challenge because the middle mile is what the digital economy is all about. If you don't have middle mile infrastructure, you don't have a digital economy. So these are things like data centers, cloud services, as well as R&D or manufacturing plants or people working in ICT-enabled services. So when we get beyond that, just the telecom networks, you see a few warehouses from Jumia for e-commerce. Mind you, they're intelligent warehouses, so they need to pick the order quickly. They're using a lot of connectivity infrastructure. You see some data centers in South Africa and in Kenya. And interesting, you see a couple of R&D locations in Ghana. It seems to be emerging as the R&D center for Africa. It's both Twitter and Google are there. But again, this is a really major gap and a challenge to get more companies to invest in this middle mile infrastructure and to find out what the barriers are, why they aren't investing there. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, every sea-facing country in Africa now has submarine cable landing stations. One of the challenges with submarine cable is we can't really allocate it to a country, so that's why I show these separately. But these are both by cables that are driven by two of the top 100 companies. The Two Africa submarine cable is Facebook's one of the consortium members, and it promises to provide more international capacity to Africa when it's completed than all of the existing submarine cables going around the continent now. And Equiano is the cable of Google that I think has launched or is going to launch soon. Next slide, please. So what do we conclude from this? As I said, apart from the telecom networks, there are very few keystone digital companies with significant investment in sub-Saharan Africa. No manufacturing site, not one single piece of digital hardware is manufactured in Africa. Very limited R&D, scarce IT-enabled services, and data centers and cloud services are mainly in South Africa, a few data centers in Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana. So one issue is that scale. A lot of African countries haven't built up their internet markets. They don't have enough users to make them interesting to international investors. So Digital Realty Trust, which is the second largest data center company in the world, they've invested in Kenya. Why? Because Kenya is the third largest market in Africa. It has one of the highest levels of internet penetration. So attracts them. So what can smaller countries do about this? Well, this is where regional cooperation comes in. Sell themselves as part of a region that has common laws, common foreign investment laws, common data protection policies, so that when a company comes in, it then can spread its reach across 5, 6, or 7 countries, because they all have the same laws that are important in the data space. The other challenge is the regulatory and other barriers that affect this enabling environment. I mean, private sector doesn't just go in, you know, they have certain expectations, they're risk adverse, they want to make sure that their investment's going to be safe. So why are they going to Ghana for R&D? Twitter said because Ghana has an open internet, it has strong institutions, it's going to be the headquarters of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So it's a attractive location. So why haven't any companies gone to Ethiopia, the second largest country in Africa by population? Because until recently, it was a telecommunications monopoly, very restrictive investment laws, things that then discourage companies from going there. So now that they've opened up the telecommunications market, I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to see a lot other spillover private investment there into data centers and cloud services. And how can we incentivize more digital companies? Well, I think a lot of them are unaware of the opportunities. So just better marketing needs to be done to overcome this image that Africa is a continent of, you know, the main issue is access, that nobody has access, it's expensive. No, there's a lot else going on there. There's a lot of startups, there's a lot of innovation. I mean, M-Pesa came out of Africa. So it's to change this image and as well as the regulatory and the enabling environment, and to attract that investment. And finally, Samantha touched on it, and the introductory speakers touched on the impact of COVID. Yes, it's exposed how woefully unprepared Africa is for things like online learning, online commerce, online health, online working. But after the pandemic passes, will things return to normal? So for instance, Twitter, even though they've announced the R&D center in Ghana, they're allowing people to work remotely. So do you need to have a physical presence in the region? I would argue very strongly, yes. That's the only way that you can understand the African context, that you can understand what's going on in the country, and that can then help you thrive and build up and give you that advantage to become a stronger investor and to bring benefit to the country and then to the entire region. So I hope this sheds some light, but again, I think, you know, we need to go beyond the common stereotypes that access is the only problem, and look more now, how can we develop the middle mile, the digital economy components, the data centers and the cloud services and things like that. Thank you.
Very, very insightful presentation there on the digital inclusion benchmark findings. That was Michael Minguez, who is the research lead at WBA, together with Samantha Diwalana, who's a research analyst there. And I can see their presentation has provoked a lot of questions. I'm loving the conversation I'm seeing in the chat section. Please, whatever your thoughts are about this discussion, post them there. And I'll be reading some of those questions even as we continue. In addition, we have over 70 participants with us right now. And if you have colleagues or stakeholders who you know wanted to be a part of this, let them know it's not too late. They can still weigh in, come in, have a listen, and share their thoughts as well, even as we continue. So Michael and Samantha, once again, thank you. You've really mapped out the influence that these 10 companies have on the continent, but also the gaps, and it's very concerning. We've seen what they've done in terms of supporting the development of digital skills, but it still isn't enough if we are talking about digital inclusion. And that's a conversation we must keep having to ensure that we achieve that, and we empower everyone to utilize tech and to advance our economy. And that key phrase is that we must leave no one behind in this particular process. I'll be keen to hear what our panelists in the next panel will have to say on the same topic. And I know they are raring to get started. For our first panel, we will be having Benjamin Mackay, who's the Senior Manager, Technology for Development Unit at Safaricom, together with Onika Makwakwa, who's the Head of Head of Africa rather, for the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and also Edrin Wanyama, the CIPESA Legal Officer. And each of them will be speaking towards one or two questions. Benjamin, let me start with you on this one. I want to hear from you on this. And Benjamin, as I mentioned earlier, is the Senior Manager, Technology for Development Unit at Safaricom. How has your company, Safaricom, used these findings to improve on its efforts towards advancing digital inclusion? In addition, what do you think are some of the areas you need to focus on in terms of enhancing digital inclusion in Africa? I'll give you 3 minutes for that, Benjamin. You may proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Maura. And let me start by saying, for us at Safaricom, data is the oil actually that drives or steers
Okay, we seem to have lost Benjamin. I'm not sure why. So while we try and figure out how to get him back on, maybe I can bring in Onika Makwakwa, who's the Head of Africa Alliance for Affordable Internet. Onika, are you online?
Yes, I am.
Great. This is what I want you to tackle. And I actually do have a question from the chat, but we'll come to that a bit later on. I want to hear from you on what you think should be done to ensure that everyone has access to ICT and they have the necessary digital skills to make use of tech, especially women and girls. And if you can tie that in with how stakeholders using the digital inclusion benchmark findings that we've just heard can support their work, that will be great for us. You may proceed, Onika.
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and congratulations again on this research. It really hits all of the key points that we've been working on for the last few years. So in terms of, we are at a point where more than half of the population in this continent is still very much offline. And we saw in the research also that even those who are in areas that could have access to connectivity are not necessarily connected. So the issue of affordability still remains a very big issue for many. So even countries that have reached the 1 for 2 affordability target, which is an international standard that says people should not spend more than 2% of average monthly income for 1 gig of data. Even those countries that have reached that target, they have only reached it for the top 20% for the most part of income earners in their countries. So still very much unaffordable and a need to work on universal access. But we are beyond access, I think now, and we hear from the research that we've just listened to, we need to be looking at meaningful connectivity where we are giving people access, we are making sure that it's the access that's valuable for them to be able to transform their lives. So 1 gig of data per month is not going to do that at all. It actually will be used up by just this one call that we're having right now. So if we want people to have meaningful access, we need to have a standard that also speaks to that. And I think it's time we move towards that. We need to have adequate skills for them. Digital skills are really, really important, and we still see a lot of the population that's staying out of being, utilizing the internet because of the skills issue. It's great to see private sector players coming in to fill this gap. However, we need to have policies and regulations that make this universal, right? We are not going to entrepreneur ourselves out of poverty. It requires intentional actions. That means that we must have policies, we must have regulations that make this universal for everyone, so that it's not just through the kindness of certain people who are able to fill in the gap, that people are able to have this kind of access. And lastly, I mean, I think, you know, the last research we had from World Bank stated that we need about $109 billion investment in terms of really connecting everyone in the continent. Even if private sector provided half of that, we still need government to fill in that gap, you know, and their development partners, as well as through some innovative PPPs to make sure. So it's not going to be just one sector. We need a multi-sectoral approach. So there's definitely a role for civil society. There is a role for government. There's a role for private sector. But I think COVID-19 has really given us, just sort of coalesced us around understanding that we all need to be connected. So we no longer need to convince people of the benefits of being connected. And I think now what needs to happen is we need to really come together and make sure that every sector plays its role towards ensuring not just access to affordable internet, but access to meaningful connectivity that includes affordable devices. Devices are still a major issue in this continent. At an average cost of about $60 per smartphone, that's actually the price of a small appliance in my household. And now, you know, to be able to have to spend that for a device for one person. And I think that it brings us to some of the points that were raised by the benchmarking group, and that is the issue of lack of manufacturing within the continent. Thank
Onika,
you.
Brilliant and passionate there, even as you tackle the question. Twahir Kasim agrees with you and says affordability is key to access. It's not just about connection being available. It must be a meaningful connectivity. Thanks so much for what is being written in the chat section. Let's keep that going. Let me see if we can get Benjamin Mackay back on. Just when he was speaking about data, he dropped off. Benjamin, do we now have you back on? He's from Safaricom.
Yes, I'm back, Mwaura. Yeah, it's a shame that I dropped off. And yeah, so what I was saying is that data is, for us at Safaricom, data is the oil that steers our development agenda. For us to come up with products and services which are relevant to the constituents we are serving, we really rely so much on data. Safaricom exists to transform lives, and as we do that, I mean, our vision is to be a purpose-led technology company with a goal of being digital first, insights-led organization that enables platforms and ecosystem partnerships. So for us to be able to gather insights, I mean, we need data, and this data is what informs the kind of products we come up with. Besides the core mobile network products, Safaricom has gone a step further. We've embraced sustainable development goals. And the question we're asking ourselves as a business is that what can the goals do for us? And it's out of that we are going beyond the core mobile to come up with what we are calling new digital areas or new digital opportunities, be it in health, be it in agriculture, be it in education. And out of that, you are able to sort of like gather insights, and once you gather those insights, they do inform the impact we could have through our products and services to the communities we serve. So basically, all I can say is that data is very crucial. To many, they say that it's a gold mine, telcos sit on. However, what we can say is that as much as we do have a lot of information and data, it is also heavily regulated. There are issues to do with the privacy, confidentiality, and consent in terms of how you can make use of the data available to you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Waiga.
Thank you, Benjamin, for really emphasizing the place of data. Its value as a gold mine, but also how heavily regulated it still is. And that's another aspect of digital inclusion that we really need to look at. In addition to devices that Onika also talked about, how accessible are they to millions of Africans across the continent. Before we wrap up panel one, and I will give a chance for maybe one or two people to respond to the panelists, so be ready if you want to say something. Let me, however, allow the final panelist to respond to a question there. That's Edrin Wanyama, the CIPESA legal officer, who can talk to us a little bit about how stakeholders will use WBA's digital inclusion benchmark findings to support their work, but also some areas that may need greater focus in terms of enhancing digital inclusion. Edrin, kindly proceed.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is fourfold. In the first part is we have key stakeholders. Number one is the civil society and academia, who are very critical for collaborating with government, and as well as for informing areas of research in the areas that affect digital inclusion. And in this, we can actually do advocacy and research together with them as champions for better policy interventions to ensure affordability and access for marginalized communities like persons with disabilities and the women and the other marginalized individuals. The second one is the private sector. And for the private sector, the approach can be reviewing how organizations function, especially internally, in terms of their practices. And this can be done through investing in sustainable programs that can build resilient yet impact-based for an inclusive digital sector. And this can also lead to incorporation of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, into the digital inclusion strategies for such that stronger internal policies can be developed. The third one is the government itself. The benchmark can inform governments on policy and regulation, as Mike stated earlier, especially in protecting citizens and users against digital harms and holding licensees to their obligations, such as universal service in case of telecom service providers. So this can provide a good baseline to periodically assess the progress of digital inclusion. And then the fourth is the public. The public is very key because here we can do the benchmark and enable the public to choose accommodative and forward-looking companies, especially those that meaningfully center digital inclusion. But all in all is that collaboration, especially between the private sector, the government, and the public are very key. Since all these, when they come into collaborative efforts, then inclusion or digital inclusion can be easily achieved across the different or the various sectors. Yes, those are the short responses.
Thank you so much. That's Edrin Wanyama, the CIPESA legal officer, really weighing in on how stakeholders can use the benchmark findings and, of course, areas of focus as well. Now, in the interest of time, I'll briefly open it up to anyone in attendance who'd like to weigh in, maybe talk about how the organization you represent or countries, companies across the continent can use the data to support their journey of digital inclusion. You can put your hand up or maybe just jump in with your question or comment. I have about a minute or so for that. Okay, anyone with a question or comment? And no need to feel shy. I've seen a lot of engagement in the chat section.
Is it okay if I do?
Please jump in, Mr. Rugege.
Thank you very much. Somebody said data is the new oil, but I want to talk about specifically how countries are losing out in terms of lack of data. They simply don't know how big a problem they have and how big an opportunity that is associated with that size of uncovered population is. So the data, if we can make their data or the data about their country part of their national accounting data, I think it would help, even help the ministries of finance who think that ICT compared to health, ICT compared to agriculture, but what they don't know is the use of ICT that would make agriculture, education, health much more productive. So I think this data needs to go to these countries proactively. Don't just send a link because they are not going to bother, but a short one-pager. This is where you stand. This is where you could be. This is the benefit. I think that would really change things in most of our countries.
That is a great suggestion, Mr. Rugege, really helping us understand how we can take the benchmark findings forward and how applicable some of this data around digital inclusion would be country by country, government by government, the format and so forth as well. And I hope it's something our audience are really thinking about even as we continue. Okay, I see one hand up. Let me see here. Yeah, I can't see the name on my browser for some reason, but please ask your question or comment.
Thank you, Wahiga. Okay, my question is actually as directed to as Banandro of ITU and Onika of Alliance for Affordable Connectivity. As we know, as African countries, or rather globally, as most countries have actually set up USF funds, which actually are supposed to facilitate the connectivity of rural areas, or rather the areas whereby telcos would not go to because they don't make financial sense. So my question is, what is ITU trying to, doing, or the Alliance, to push the government to actually utilize these funds to do what they're supposed to do? Thank you.
Bahir, what organization do you represent?
Sorry, actually, I run a digital hub in rural Kenya, Kilifi County in particular. The organization is called Lamuka Hub.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rugege, you may respond.
May I?
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that great question. It gives me an opportunity that I didn't have in my 7 minutes. I think what we are doing, and I think what all organizations should do, is not to go to tell the countries, put your money here. But what we are doing, and we are doing this with Giga, we are doing this with the digital transformation centers, we are doing this with Girls in ICT, we are doing this in Connect to Recover. All these initiatives, when we go to a country, we are going to a country with an initiative for partnership with government. We are not saying here is an initiative, please carry it out. We are saying here's an opportunity for us together to build this for your people. Secondly, we also have in ITU an entire division that deals with data and statistics. And the suggestion that I made earlier to you is something that we are actually doing, but we are going to make stronger. We have a dashboard that takes this data, right, and makes it country specific, and we give them access to it. So those are some of the things that we are doing to encourage the countries, because if we go to Sierra Leone and show them through the digital maps that I was talking about, show them how far their connectivity goes, show them which schools are not connected, say, okay, here is what we are going to do as ITU, would like to partner with you, what can you do? It is very embarrassing to say nothing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rugege, and we'll have to pause the question time there and allow the second panel to also come and weigh in on this discussion that we're having today. The topic is, how can Africa and global multi-stakeholders work together to drive corporate action on digital inclusion. And this panel will have Farid Abbasov, who's the emerging markets and telecoms analyst at Fidelity International. Also, Sulamita Romanchik, policy analyst, Center for International Digital Policy at the Global Affairs in Canada, and Joanne Katambi, who's founder and team leader at the Digital Literacy Initiative. I trust that each of them are on standby. We will begin with Farid Abbasov, who will be talking to us a bit about, from an investment analyst perspective, why do they think it's useful or relevant for investors to factor in the company's performance across 4 areas of digital inclusion, especially for companies with significant presence in emerging markets like Africa? And also, what role can asset managers play in fostering an inclusive digital economy and society? Farid, you may unmute your mic and respond to that question briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, happy to participate in today's event, and I found quite a lot of interesting points in today's discussion. And from our perspective, as a sort of investment house, I just have to say that priorities are shifting recently from investing just in firms that are maximizing shareholder value to firms that are maximizing shareholder value in a sustainable and ethical way. So sustainability is becoming an important KPI and requirement from our own investors. And we pay a very close attention. And I think over the past 12 months, I can tell you that the focus has shifted a lot more, towards addressing that sustainability angle in investing in businesses. So if you think it's not only about customers, just regular citizens adjusting their shopping behavior, buying from organizations that align with their values, but also investors adjusting their investment philosophy by incorporating an ESG framework into the decision process, in addition, obviously, to those firms driving the shareholder value through simply financial metrics. And obviously, digitization is a requirement these days to survive for a lot of firms, and what pandemic has actually proved. Again, that it's almost an important requirement for firms to survive, and it's also an important requirement for a lot of firms in Africa to drive growth forward. Right? It's sort of a hurdle that they have to unlock. And from the telecoms perspective, I think Safaricom is a great example of the business that delivered on both growth and value for all the stakeholders, right? Not only for financial investors, but for Kenya as a whole, for the government, and for the ordinary citizens. Now, obviously, we have a fiduciary duty in front of our own investors, and we still have to invest in companies that generate value for the shareholders. But what is important for us is to address that, that sort of profit maximization is not done at the expense of by jeopardizing the ethical values, right? They have to enhance sort of the ethical angle as well as delivering that value. So I think over the past 12 months, I had quite a lot of engagements, and I don't only cover the telco sector, but I also cover the energy sector. And I think I can experience that from large multinational investors, we've become a lot more active in engaging with those firms and in voicing, our sort of importance in them driving that ESG agenda forward. And also where we add value is generally sharing more examples that we see in other regions, right? One good example could be us flagging just a simple case study, Red Compartida. It's a shared network in Mexico where government actually created and fostered that investment and expansion of the network in uncovered areas by inviting more MVNOs, but as well as investors outside the key regional players. And again, I mean, I think we'll continue to trying to support, share best examples globally, and also try to push in a nice way for those publicly listed companies to operate in a sustainable and ethical way. That's all I have to say from our side.
Thank you, Farid, for capturing that. He's the emerging markets and a telecoms analyst at Fidelity International, joining us to give us that particular perspective. Let me also bring in Sulamita Romanchik, who's the policy analyst at the Center for International Digital Policy at the Global Affairs in Canada, to talk to us about how Canada and other global actors, let's get a bigger picture of how they can help in fostering a broad digital approach to digital inclusion, but also what are steps that Canada is taking or can take to work together with multi-stakeholders from the African continent to ensure that there is broad-based participation in a safe and trustworthy digital economy and society. Let's get a perspective from beyond our continent, and that's brought to you by Sulamita. Over to you, Sulamita.
Thank you, and thank you so much to WBA and CIPESA for hosting this roundtable, for allowing me to share some thoughts on behalf of Canada. So Canada believes that the principle of digital inclusion serves as a constructive starting point for discussions on global governance of technology, but also access to the internet, including with the private sector and African countries. And so for this reason, we lead and participate in international multi-stakeholder processes on digital inclusion. And through these processes, we can help foster a broader approach to digital inclusion. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about multi-stakeholder engagement, it's not just about having diverse voices at the table, whether physically or virtually. It's also about ensuring that those voices are equally heard, weighed, and incorporated into digital inclusion work. One process through which to work towards this is the UN Secretary General's Roundtable on Digital Inclusion as part of the Roadmap for Digital Cooperation. So Canada co-champions alongside UN Women and Mexico this roundtable, and I'm pleased that there is broad representation and engagement at the table. WBA is there, as well as African representation, for example, the government of Malawi, African Development Bank, and Research ICT Africa. One of the key actions of this multi-stakeholder roundtable is the establishment of a digital inclusion coalition. So it'll be a network of networks of like-minded member states, civil society groups, the private sector, other stakeholders, to harmonize digital inclusion efforts at the global level, but also advance policies, foster dialogue from all sectors of society, and share best practices, among others. So while we look forward to continued collaboration with African stakeholders at this roundtable and the private sector, as well as the network to be established, we encourage greater engagement moving forward. The network is open to any entity or organization working or interested in digital inclusion and willing to engage actively within. The Freedom Online Coalition, or in short, the FOC, is another example where various stakeholders can come together to drive global action on digital inclusion. It's a multilateral forum that is committed to supporting internet freedom and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms. Canada is an active member of the FOC's Digital Equality Task Force. It was established to oversee the implementation of the FOC Joint Statement on Digital Inclusion. And this joint statement was actually launched by the governments of Ghana and Germany, and they also co-chair this Digital Equality Task Force. And actually next year, Canada will chair the FOC as a whole based on the theme of digital inclusion. And during your chairship, we will explore ways in which to increase collaboration with African countries and various other stakeholders. We aim to build on the great work of this year's chair, Finland, on promoting digital inclusion in the African context. to ensure that there remains broad participation in global discussions and initiatives on digital inclusion. So you'll be hearing a lot from us in the months and year to come. And thank you. I look forward to hearing contributions from the other panelists and the audience.
Thank you, Sulamita, and just helping us understand that it's not just about having diverse voices at the table, but that those voices must count. You've talked about platforms where that is happening beyond Africa's borders, and how Africa can continue to be involved. And I actually, on a related note, want to bring in Joanne Katambi, who's the founder and team leader at the Digital Literacy Initiative, to now give us another perspective. How can African stakeholders now work with global actors for an inclusive digital economy? Joanne, you may briefly respond to that, please.
Thank you so much, Wahida. And I want to also thank the team, WBA and CIPESA, for having us on this roundtable of Africa. For starters, of course, when you talk about the digital inclusion right here, we are looking at individuals, including groups of people such as women, persons with disabilities, and also children being able to access and use information communication technologies. Whereas digital divide and digital literacy have entered into common usage today in the discussions by policymakers, you find that still people, lack the actual way of, bringing it on board when it comes to digital inclusion in terms, of course, of access and usage of these tools. And of course, you find that the ability to access and use the internet is central to everyone, including women, PWDs, and children. So, of course, when these groups gain meaningful access of what Onik said of connectivity, they are able to participate in the knowledge economies around and also into the discussions across the globe. So, of course, back to you, of course, to your question, how Africa and other stakeholders could work together. Number one, I believe we need to develop gender-responsive strategies and policies that support, ICT, but also technologies and of course policies that ensure digital rights are also human rights in this era. And of course, we also need to ensure to build digital capacities for women and girls, persons with disabilities, and children, but also support development of local content, local applications and services that meet, these groups of people's needs. There also needs to, we also need to learn from how such barriers of access, affordability, safety, and relevant digital skills can be addressed in this context if we are really to bring this digital inclusion on board and be able to also work within it to support the different economies. But also, I want to also tell you that we also need support in terms of digital integration of the African continent and other stakeholders, of course, under guidance of stakeholders such as the African Union, ITU, to ensure that we really achieve the digital inclusion we talk about within our region, not forgetting, of course, the deployment of affordable broadband connectivity across the continent. Whereas, everyone is addressing this issue, they tend to dwell within the urban areas. But research has been done that when you go to the rural areas, the digital divide issue is really alarming. And this has really proven in this era of the COVID-19, where you get to send out, people out of school to learn from home, where there's even no infrastructure, no access to broadband connectivity, among others. Over to you, Wahiga. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne Katambi, for that, just giving us that perspective on how African stakeholders can work together with global actors for an inclusive digital economy, but talking about the challenges of those who are not digitally included, who are actually marginalized and have not been able to take advantage of these opportunities that the digital economy now provides. I now want to open it up to a few questions. And I already see a hand is up. Edrin Wanyama, I think from CIPESA, I believe. Who wants to weigh in on this? Make your comments or questions brief.
Sorry, I was requesting just before actually the panel started, I was requesting whether I could come through for my second question, which was about 1 minute response, but I didn't respond because I thought there was another round of questions. But in brief, part of the questions that you had asked me was to spot out some of the areas that require focus in terms of enhancing digital inclusion in Africa, and I thought of fronting effective implementation of universal service and access policies, funds, and programs. And then I'd also thought of taking measures to lower the cost of ICT enabled devices, airtime, and data costs, like through tax incentives, so they reduce value-added tax to 0 rating, besides the grants. And then I thought of promotion of accessible products and services for persons with disabilities to narrow mobile disability gap, and also promotion of community networks to cover unreserved areas, and then taking hold of steps to improve women and girls' access to ICT and their safety as they use digital texts, with a view of narrowing the digital gender gap, and then also digital skills training in digital security and awareness, as well as promotion of development of local content and platforms. So that was part of my response to the second question, which I had skipped. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for keeping it to 1 minute. Do we have anyone else who'd like to jump in with a question or a comment? I also do see some questions on the chat part of this roundtable. If nobody speaks, then I will pick up a question from the chat section. Okay, as we wait for that to happen, Twahir Kasim is asking Joan Katambi, talk to us a little bit about local content versus the localization of content. It's been a raging debate. How do we untangle this? Joan, kindly unmute your microphone and respond to that question.
Thank you so much, moderator, and Kasim, for your question. Of course, now why we emphasize or look out for local content in ICTs is for people, is for every stakeholder, is for every individual to really understand whatever we are trying to deliver within the ICT. For example, if you're trying to give an application of Microsoft Word, you find that because of the terms and the design of the technology within it, when you train up people, for example, in the rural areas, they might get it first time. But of course, they will tell you that if this was within the language that I understand, the local language, the kind of content we give, it would be even much easier for them to pursue. But then when it comes to localization, of course, we are looking at even tech companies coming up to do their tech with design, looking at the actual needs of our users on the ground level within the different countries within Africa. And I think there is one of these initiatives is being run by Mozilla in terms of localizing content of ICT within the Swahili. So you find that such kind of initiatives is all we need for people to really take in whatever content we are issuing as versus to the technology within the region.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanne, for that. And maybe I'll take one more question, and we request everyone to stay on 3 minutes after 4:30 p.m. East African time. We are actually just wrapping up. The other question that I have picked up from Anjadi, she asks, The digital benchmark findings seem to be missing the input generated by the tech giants that are entrenching themselves daily in the Africa tech space. Is there a reason why they were not yet mapped out? I don't know if someone from the World Benchmarking Alliance would like to speak to that concern. Maybe I can call upon Bruno Besek if you're on the line.
I can do
Go
it.
ahead.
Can she clarify the question a bit? Because, this was covering the 100 top digital companies. So I'm not sure what it means, what she means by her question.
And we still have you, Anjali.
Yeah, I'm
Just
right.
clarify your question, please. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Wahiga. Thank you, Michael. The question basically means we do see the likes of what they call GAFAM, Google, Facebook, Amazon coming into the African space, and they are all, investing heavily into the tech and, internet and data infrastructure in Africa. So when I look at the companies that you looked at, I didn't see such companies as part of the, the scope that was looked into. So I was just wondering, how does this actually change the perspective or the insights that were gathered? I remember the report kept saying, there was a part of the report was saying 42 countries, or is it 47 countries within the top 100 are based in Africa? But then how about those ones that are coming, the transnational movement of tech giants that are coming and actually investing into the data and internet infrastructure in Africa? How are they accounted for when it comes to digital inclusion?
Well, thanks for the question and clarifying, but they were included. So on the map that I showed of the middle mile infrastructure, it includes, for instance, Microsoft and Amazon's web services in South Africa. Facebook is not making any physical infrastructure investment in particular countries, but rather, as I also showed, they're investing in a submarine cable. So all of the operational and significant presence of the top 100 companies was shown in that map.
Okay.
Okay. Briefly, okay. Anne, please.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that. I think I'll pick up this with Michael later. I would request for your email address if you can kindly have this conversation going.
Yeah. And then I can send you also the raw data that the map was based on, so then you can see the exact companies that are behind it.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you for those questions. I know there are more. Yes, I do see those hands, but unfortunately, we are almost at the tail end of the program. And so let me now invite Lourdes Montenegro back. She is the WBA Digital Sector Transformation Lead to make a closing statement. Lourdes.
Thanks, Wahiga. Actually, Simeon has beat me to it. So I'm really, really happy that we are already so advanced. We're already now thinking, so what's next? We're discussing the problem, but what's really important is what are we going to do together? How are we going to act together and coordinate our efforts? Because as we've said, as Simeon has stated, there are 70 people, well, 64 now, but there are a lot of people in this conversation representing different countries, different perspectives, different groups, organizations, and sectors of society. And the discussion has been really wide-ranging. It has revealed that there's a lot more that we need to do. There's a lot of areas we need to look into. So the data that we're providing on what the private sector is doing or not doing enough of already triggers our thinking on what are public policy actions we need to do, what do investors need to do, what do civil society actors need to do, what do think tanks need to do, what do governments need to do. So I think that is what is next. That's the call to action. So we invite everyone. The WBA is called the WBA because it's actually an alliance, the World Benchmarking Alliance. And we invite the groups who are in this discussion to please feel free to get in touch with us. after this, we're very happy to have conversations on how we're going to work together. And most importantly, what kind of actions can different groups in society take so that we can drive this progress towards digital inclusion forward, and also encourage the private sector to actually do a lot more, and what can government as well do, as well as investors and global stakeholders. So that's the next step. Let's get together. Let's talk about what we're gonna do in terms of actions, concrete actions. What can we each contribute? Think about what your group can also do individually. If you are representing consumers, what kind of campaigns can consumers do? If you're representing think tanks, what kind of papers, what kind of advocacies can you bring to the table? If you're representing investors, how can you engage the companies in your portfolio to do more, as well as how can you potentially talk publicly, or maybe talk to the public sector on how you can work together. So we hope to see that next, and we're very happy to speak to all of you. So please kindly be in touch, and let's be stronger together. Let's form a coalition that will take coordinated actions to drive urgent gaps in the digital inclusion landscape globally.
Lourdes, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that call to action. Very timely, very appropriate. And we certainly hope all the stakeholders involved here today, they have the power to ensure that no one is left behind. And we certainly trust everybody will move quickly within their networks to do so. Remember, please also share what you're learning and your comments and your questions online at ITU Africa, at CIPESA UG, and at SDG Benchmarks, the relevant Twitter handles, hashtag DIB2020 and hashtag Digital Inclusion Benchmark, the necessary hashtags to use even as we wrap up this discussion. Please let the discussion not end here. Let's take it online to that digital space that we spent the last hour or so talking about. I also want to give a minute now to get some closing remarks from the CIPESA representative here, who is Edrin Wanyama, the legal officer. Briefly, Edrin, give us closing remarks on behalf of CIPESA.
All right, thank you very much. CIPESA works towards an effective and inclusive ICT policy towards a digital society that is open, inclusive, and empowering. And to attain this, we acknowledge the importance of working with networks and coalitions with shared interests. And that is why we joined WBA earlier this year. And for that, we are glad to have co-hosted this event. And we are actually inviting actors in the digital sector to join this movement, work towards achieving the digital inclusion. And for that, of course, it is crucial to involve multiple stakeholders, civil society, the private sector, government officials, developers, and other actors in such conversations so that we can advance digital inclusion. And through our initiatives like ADRF, FIFA Africa, we always seek to build larger movements of multiple stakeholders that promote digital inclusion and digital society that is free, open, and offers opportunities to all. So by joining WBA, we are happy to be part of a movement that furthers this goal of getting a louder voice for multiple stakeholders across geographical regimes who provide an opportunity to learn and support one another and to engage collaboratively in different approaches that promote digital inclusion by pulling expertise, resources, and networks together. We thank WBA for this opportunity and invite other players in the digital sector to join us in this network. Thank you so much on behalf of CIPESA for this such of great work that is happening in as far as digital inclusion is concerned. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Respectfully, I'll give Mr. Rugege literally 30 seconds just to have one word. This is a special request. Mr. Rugege?
Just to say this was a great initiative. Just to say, as people around this table, I think Lourdes said, we probably have some influence in doing something to connect the unconnected in this continent, each one with their own little influence, each one with their own little contribution or big contribution, depending on who we are, but it is this collaboration that is going to change the narrative in Africa. Don't think somebody sitting in another place in Europe, in US, in Russia, or whatever, is going to come and change the narrative here. It's you and I, it's African people, for ourselves now, for the children to come, that we can change things for them. So that is my parting shot. ITU is with you, is prepared to partner with anybody, and you particularly, in order to do everything that we can, whether it is through data, whether it is through our private sector members, academia, or even just member states. We are ready and prepared. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Excellent. Mr. Andrew Rugege, thank you so much for that. No wonder I gave you the final word on this. And thank you once again. And thanks to everyone just posting in the chat section. It seems the call to action has been taken seriously. Please, beyond this forum, let us take the conversation forward. You've heard what needs to happen from Mr. Rugege, from Laudes as well. Time is money, so they say. So let's move quickly and implement what's been discussed in this forum. I just want to say one thing before we close the meeting. Need for more collaborated coordination is crucial to remove those barriers to digital inclusion. The World Benchmarking Alliance, as you have heard, is inviting stakeholders to join its alliance of global stakeholders who are committed to driving forward actionable outcomes to facilitate private sector contributions to achieving that digital inclusion which supports the SDGs. Now, through this alliance, you can act on the issues discussed today in a more coordinated way. That's very important to achieve the digital inclusion. And the WBA, as mentioned earlier, is welcoming all stakeholders to use this benchmark data to improve their advocacy and their policy work. So feel free to go out and spread the information that you've gleaned and learned here today. And thank you for everyone who's saying how much you really enjoyed this insightful roundtable. Let me then go on to thank everyone. First, those who attended and contributed to this roundtable in one way or the other. Over 100 participants collectively, we say thank you. I want to thank all the speakers who took time from their busy programs to be with us, whichever part of their world they joined us from. We say thank you as well. And to the organizers, the World Benchmarking Alliance, the collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, CIPESA, and the International Telecommunication Union, ITU Africa Regional Office. Thank you so much for facilitating this roundtable. And we hope to have more conversations like this in days to come. Let's go out and make digital inclusion a reality for African citizens across this beautiful land. Thank you so much. My name is Wahiga Mwaura. I've been your moderator today, and I wish you a digitally inclusive remainder of the rest of your day, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and let's get moving on those action points. Goodbye.